So, hello everyone, and welcome to our fourth webinar in our orientation series. This is Write Like a Pro, Essays, Academic Integrity, and AI, and I am very happy to be here with you. If you haven't gotten tired of my voice just yet, I am Angela Francis. I'm the Assistant Dean of General Education and First Year Experience. And I am also, more importantly, your facilitator right now. So very happy to be here with you this afternoon/evening. I do want to show you just information about our last webinar during orientation. Start Strong, Resources to Help You Thrive. This is really focused both on resources in terms of offices at SPS, but also in terms of free and maybe a couple of low-cost resources you might enjoy using. So, for example, making sure you know that you have access to a free digital subscription to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, things of that nature. So we will be hosting that this coming Thursday, but we will, of course, record it in case you can't make it. As usual, I ask that if you have a question for me about writing, that you put it in the QA. If you're having technical issues, please do put those in the chat. We have a wonderful team here from events, Molly and Heather, who are just indispensable and are helping with those issues. And I also just want to give a shout out to our captioner, Ryan. So in case you need any captions, those are indeed available. So our agenda for today is just to talk very briefly about the writing process, designing a more persuasive essay, crafting effective paragraphs, tackling longer writing assignments, academic integrity, and AI. I am going to be moving between this slide deck and another one that goes into some of these things in depth. I'll be moving into that second slide deck depending on the questions you ask. So as a result, I would ask that you, if you see something that I cover and you realize, oh, I'm not familiar with that, please go ahead and put that in the QA because I will be checking it periodically. I also want to note at this point that you do not need to take careful notes about something that is on the screen because we will be providing you with copies of both slide decks. So both the one that's on your screen now and the one that goes into things a little bit more depth. So please don't worry about taking all of those notes. So let's start with information about a well-rounded writing process. There are 5 steps to this process, and it's my personal favorite. First one is just breaking down the assignment. So this is when you receive that assignment prompt or you first have access to it, making sure you really do understand what is required. What is the page or word count? What are the number of sources and how many? Are there any keywords in the prompt? So if you think back to when you were writing shorter essays, sometimes you were writing a comparison paper and the word compare or contrast would be in the prompt. You're looking for information like that. Next would be developing, a preliminary thesis. So you're just starting out, you haven't done the research yet, but you probably have a feeling. What is that feeling? And remember that a thesis is a topic plus a position. So my favorite example is that if my topic is pets, cats versus dogs, and my position is that cats make better pets than dogs do, my really preliminary thesis could just be that cats are better pets than dogs. You start there, you move into researching the topic. And so this is when you discover not just the points that support, in my case, that cats are better than dogs, but what are things that could prove me wrong? What if dogs are actually better pets for most people than than cats are. This is when you're researching around that topic. After you've done that, it's time to refine your thesis and your organization. So you may have discovered that your preliminary thesis was wrong, and now is when you adjust it. This is also when you would start thinking about the organization of your paper, what points to put when. This is when you'll frequently see people using things like outlines. And then you finally get to write. And really, I mean, you can see that there's a lot of work happening here before you are doing writing. But that's because by doing all of that work, you are less likely to get a draft down and realize, oh, this actually doesn't make as much sense as I thought it did. And now you have to rewrite a larger part of your paper. So of course, this means that you need to have time. And this is one of those reasons why in your courses, we really do suggest going in the beginning of the week to look at the assignments rather than waiting toward the middle or end of the week. Because if you discover you have a question about the assignment prompt, that's in the first stage of this process. You can't move forward until you have an answer from your faculty member. So before we move forward with more information, we actually want to ask you a series of 2 Zoom polls. So the first one is just, how comfortable do you feel with your current writing skills? And the second one is thinking about what we just covered. What is the part of the writing process that you find the most challenging? So we'll give you guys some time to just think about and respond to those 2 questions. All right, just gonna give you guys about 10 more seconds. All right. And final call. Let's see what you guys said. So hopefully you can see this on your screen. But in terms of the first question, how comfortable do you feel with your current writing skills? It is actually fairly well split. We've got about 41% who are saying somewhat comfortable. And that's actually a pretty good place to be in the beginning of your first semester back at an institution. And then I am noticing that we have about 20% who are feeling various degrees of uncomfortable, as well as 20% who are saying they feel very comfortable. So wherever you are on this, please do not worry. If you are feeling very comfortable, you're off to a great start. That is true. But if you're not feeling comfortable, you have a lot of resources to help you. And this is the first one. So the fact that you are taking proactive steps, remember that's that growth mindset work that we have in orientation. You should be very proud of yourself because I know that this can be quite scary. And then for our second of our 2 questions, just what part do you find most challenging? See, a lot of you are saying generating ideas, brainstorming, that's hard. And that makes a lot of sense because at that point you're kind of starting from scratch, right? And then 15 to 20% roughly are indicating the other stages are difficult. So if we have time, I am going to try to give some extra help in some of these areas. But again, if I don't manage to cover all of this, you will indeed have the full PDF of another slide deck that really does go into all of those stages in depth. So thank you all so much. And let's get started. Let's talk about designing a more persuasive essay. So One thing to think about is, are you a quote unquote plotter or a pantser? And we usually hear about these terms when we're thinking about fiction writing. Plotters are people who like to have a roadmap before they get started. So if you're someone who doesn't want to work on an outline, or who does want to work on an outline before you start working on a draft, you want to know, okay, my first point is going to be A, my second point is going to be B. You are a plotter. If, on the other hand, you don't like doing that, you like to just sit there and work on a first draft and discover what you have to say as you go, that is being a pantser. Neither one of these is right or wrong, although I will acknowledge that generally speaking, in academic writing, we really do encourage you to try to work as a plotter. And that is to say, do the research, do the outlining before you write the drafts. You can use either. So if you find you are trying to write an assignment and you just can't get past some of this brainstorming work, skip it for now. See what comes out, work as a pantser. The key part is to make sure that you hit all of the steps on that previous page. So the example I like to give is outlining. If you're a plotter, you are going to write an outline before you write your first draft. If you are a pantser, you might write your first draft and then sit with it and make an outline based of it so that you can see what your organization looks like. Because it's much easier to move things around or see when your organization has an issue when you're looking at an outline than it is when you're working from a 5-page paper. So again, use the tools in a way that fits your style for your particular assignment. Just make sure you hit all the steps. Other things to think about: write for a skeptical reader. So I remember as a student, I always had this question of who my reader was. Like, okay, I know I'm writing and my professor's going to read it, but who are they a stand-in for? And the answer is a skeptical reader. So if I am your professor, you should consider me to be decently informed, like a layperson, willing to be convinced, but I am not already convinced. I am looking for holes in your argument because maybe I don't agree with you. So to work on that, check on your thesis. And again, your thesis is the topic plus your position on it. Make sure that you have a thesis that can be defended and needs to be defended. So the sky is blue doesn't really need to be defended, right? But you can also have thesis statements that are so broad, you can't defend them within the scope of your paper. I have a thesis that cats are better than dogs, and my paper is 2 pages long. I can't defend that in 2 pages. So make sure your thesis and your assignment match. Next, tailor your evidence to your audience. So if you're thinking about a skeptical reader, I don't know how many of you think that dogs might make a better pet than cats. My job is to figure out why you might think that, and then have evidence that helps disprove your argument. And that is integrating rebuttals. So a rebuttal is basically me recognizing what some of the more powerful arguments you have might be, and in the course of my paper, showing you why they're not right. Because in a paper, unfortunately, you can't have that back and forth. You have to do that work ahead of time. 2 tools that might be helpful to you when you're thinking about these. One is Aristotle's Appeals. And so that's discussing different types of arguments: logical arguments, emotional arguments, arguments based on the reputation of the author. And then there's the Toolman model, which is talking about really the different structural parts. So you had, for example, a claim you were making, and then you have the support for that claim, and you have things that connect your support to the claim. That's what the Toolman model discusses. If you are enrolled in English 101 and 102, Those two courses cover both of these in depth, but you can also look at them yourself as well. I also want to talk about paragraphs because that's talking about the paper on a large scale. But that big building block of your paper are paragraphs. And I found paragraphs very confusing when I was writing papers as an undergraduate. Someone once told me a paragraph is 3 to 7 sentences, and I said, great, all right, I'm counting sentences. But in reality, that is not what defines a paragraph. So we're going to talk about the fact that it actually conveys a single idea. The whole point of a paragraph is to have one idea, and it's going to convey it using a topic sentence. If you have never heard of a topic sentence, the easiest way to think about it is that it is the thesis statement of your paragraph. It then provides evidence in support of that topic sentence, and it contains a concluding sentence. So I'm curious, I'm going to ask a weird question. I want you to give me a thumbs up if what I'm about to say is true. Have you have never heard of a topic sentence before? Have you heard of a topic sentence? Give me a thumbs up if you have not. I want to know if you've not heard of a topic sentence before. All right, that is a decent number of people. So I am going to make sure I return to that in a little bit. Thank you, everyone. The last part of a paragraph is just a concluding sentence to really wrap it up, so that you can say, this idea, this single idea that I have, done. We're going to move on to the next one. If you find that you've got one idea in 2 paragraphs, it's possible that you actually have one paragraph you've split. And that's why people say, oh, at least 3 sentences, right? Because if you have a bunch of 2-sentence paragraphs, you probably don't have a full idea with evidence and a concluding sentence. If you have a topic sentence, 1 piece of evidence, and a concluding sentence, that is indeed 3 sentences. The problem is that sometimes you need more than 7 sentences to convey an idea. But what we do suggest you do is, if you find your paragraphs are getting quite long, go and make sure you just have one idea in them. Make sure that your topic sentence, that first sentence in your paragraph, conveys that idea, and there's nothing in that paragraph that doesn't relate to it. So, topic sentences, main point of the paragraph, it connects back to your thesis, and everything in your paragraph connects back to it. It should be in your own words. So sometimes it's tempting to have the first sentence of your paragraph be a quotation. In reality, unless your entire paragraph is going to be a close reading of that quotation, it should be an assertion in your own words. Remember that basically sources are there to be background singers for you. They're there to make you look and sound good. They're there to make sort of the song of your essay more enticing, more interesting, but they should never take over your own voice. Your voice should be the main one in your. And I do see a question, not about this, but about citation styles. So I'm actually going to pause to answer this now because I can give you a nice, easy answer. If you are taking a general education course at SPS, we have decided to make almost all of those use APA style. And that is because most of the majors at SPS require APA style. So if by default, if there's no clarification in gen ed, even if you're in an English course, you can write an APA style. For your major, it is field specific. So for example, because I was in a liberal arts field, my PhD is in English, my citation style was MLA. If my degree had been in psychology, that would have been APA. So it really is about the field you're in. If in doubt, you can ask the professor, but that is the safest bet. All right. And just one check before we move on any further. In terms of topic sentences, if you want to see if your topic sentences are accurate, easiest way to do that is skim. So when you're skimming readings, what you're doing is you're reading the first paragraph or the first sentence and the last sentence of every paragraph. And if you think back to the structure of a paragraph, that means you're reading the topic sentence and the paragraph's conclusion. And if you do that for every sentence in your paper, you should be able to have a general lay of the land of your paper. You should have the big picture. If you realize that something is not included, that means something is probably wrong with one of your topic sentences. Likewise, if you don't see the connection between two paragraphs, that means something is probably wrong with one of your concluding sentences. So that's just a nice, easy way to check. I also want to talk about flow because you might sometimes see that. Essentially, when we talk about flow, we mean it quote unquote reads well, which is not that much clearer, right? But really that means number one, it is easy to follow your overall organization. Your paragraph structure makes sense. The order of your paragraphs makes sense. And your sentence structure is varied. So it's not all what we call simple sentences, which are things like if I say cats are better than dogs, dogs make a big mess. I don't have the money for big messes, right? Each one of those is structured in a similar way. And so they can start to sound choppy. So thinking about this on the organizational, paragraph, and sentence levels, in order to have flow, make sure you are ordering your ideas with logical connections. If you find yourself writing, like I said earlier, that's a sign that you've split an idea into two different parts of your essay, and you want to check your organization. Provide context for how ideas relate. So if you're moving from one idea to the next, that's where you can use transition words like however, additionally, moreover. You can also use phrases. So while author A said that, author B had a different idea. Those types of transitions can really help with flow. Also, think about your order for your evidence. We often suggest putting the most obvious point first and the strongest point last, but that is not a hard and fast rule. If you're not sure what to do in your first draft, go ahead and do it that way. But then when you are revising, check and see if it actually works best in that order. Revise it and reorder it if that makes more sense for you. At the paragraph level, again, use topic sentences. Follow that topic sentence with the supporting evidence. Arrange your sentences so that the ideas connect directly, just like you're doing with paragraphs. And avoid ending a paragraph with a quotation, because remember, the last sentence of your paragraph should be the conclusion. At the sentence level, you're going to want to vary your sentence structure. Use sentence clauses to your advantage. And what I'll do is I'll add a link into orientation about sentence clauses. If you're someone who really struggles with grammar, and in particular with commas and comma placements, sentence clauses are like a magical method to figure that out. There are only two types of sentence clauses. Those two types of clauses create every sentence you have ever read. So once you learn how those two can combine and the rules for punctuation, that becomes so much easier. Think again about those transition words and phrases, and just double check the order of your sentences. So let's move on. I don't see any open questions right now. I want to talk about tackling longer assignments, because particularly if you're transitioning in or transferring in a lot of credits, you might find yourself in a course that's requiring a longer paper. And I found that 8 to 10 pages tends to be the length where students start to feel a little bit anxious. but there's actually a really easy way to format this to reduce that stress. So essentially, you're thinking about a longer story or a larger story, and that means the scope and reach of your thesis can be larger, right? So just like when I was thinking about that 2-page paper, and there was no way for me to cover a thesis that just said cats are better than dogs in that much space. When you have a longer paper, so an assignment that's requiring a heavier word count, that is telling you about the type of thesis it expects you to have. That means that you should have a thesis that is either larger in scale or scope or more complicated. So you don't want to have the same thesis you would have for a 2-page paper. So the thesis then follows, or I should say the thesis then leads to the depth of your argument. If you find yourself starting to pad, look back at your thesis. Likewise with complexity. Often when you have the thesis that is not deep or complex enough, you will find yourself running out of things to say to support it. So always, if you are finding yourself padding, if you're really struggling with what else can I say, why is this paper so long, look at your thesis. And sometimes that requires going back and doing more research. If you think back about the writing process, the important thing to remember is that it is not linear. You may need to do certain stages more than once. So you might research, come up with a thesis, write a draft of your paper, and when you are revising it, realize you have a big hole, or you just discovered a counter argument you haven't addressed. Do not feel ashamed about needing to go back to doing research. So I want to talk about organizational statements here, because I find that people haven't heard about these before. Let's do a check. So same thing. If organizational statement is a new term for you, can you give me a thumbs up? This is something you haven't heard of before. All right, look at those thumbs. Well then, let me tell you all about these, because I actually love these a lot. Full caveat, I am a plotter. And I find that organizational statements help me figure out my entire outline, because they tell your reader what to expect in your essay. They also tell you what to expect in your essay. They do that by stating outright the 2 or 3 main pieces of evidence in the order they will appear in your essay. And they can be a part of your thesis, or they can exist on their own. And I want to show you an example. So this, just continuing with my theme of cats and dogs, is a thesis statement, right? Because you can see there's a topic, which is a better choice, cats or dogs, and there's a position. And I've gone a bit more in depth than just saying cats are better than dogs. I'm saying that while cats and dogs both provide health benefits to their owners, cats are a better choice. If I stopped right here, I would have a perfectly functional thesis. But if I add an organizational statement, what I have here are 3 main points to support my topic. So point number 1, they have a smaller carbon footprint. Point number 2, they are less expensive. And point number 3, cats adopt their owner's personality, which means they will generally fit in well with the rest of your household. Now, 2 great things about having an organizational statement. 1, my thesis is now a lot stronger, right? But 2, when I'm thinking about the order and organization of my paper, all I have to do is come back to this. And I know that the first point I need to prove is that cats have a smaller carbon footprint than dogs. The second I need to prove is that cats are less expensive than dogs. And the third I need to prove is that because cats adopt their owner's personality, they generally fit in better with the rest of the household. Imagine if you start with this, how much easier it is to write an outline, or how much easier it is to then write a first draft, right? So I am a huge proponent of these. And then if we bring that to a larger assignment and you have your organizational statement, you can actually do the paper within a paper method. Essentially, you are making a shorter paper out of each part of that organizational statement. You are writing an outline for the overall structure, but also for those shorter papers. And what does that look like? Well, if these are the parts of my paper, and let's say I have approximately an 8 to 10 page paper to write, well, I've got my introduction, that's a page. I've got a conclusion, let's say that's a page to a page and a half. And then I'm writing a 2 to 3 page paper on each part of my organizational statement. So I now have a 2-page paper on cats having a smaller carbon footprint than dogs, a 2-page paper on cats being less expensive, and a 2 to 2.5 page paper on cats adopting their owner's personality. And now you don't have to think about a 10-page paper, right? All you have to think about is 2 to 3 page papers that you then connect using your introduction and your conclusion. But again, it is much easier to do this when you have an organizational statement. So I hope that this tip helps you feel a little bit less nervous about those longer papers, because really, they're just shorter papers in disguise. And in particular, once you get to those 8 to 10 page papers, you can actually have a heading. So you can have your introduction, and then you can have a heading that says the carbon footprint. And then there's your paper. Now you have another heading, the impact of cost of cats and dogs. You have another 2 to 5 page paper. So this is just less overwhelming, and also easier to edit. I want to transition to academic integrity because this is important. And we've written this so that this is something that you can just look at as a PDF later, and you'll have general information. Honestly, academic dishonesty is prohibited by CUNY. And so if you haven't taken that academic integrity quiz in orientation yet, please do, because there are very specific rules at CUNY. The key thing to think about here is that the consequences can vary, right? Sometimes you'll get a warning. Sometimes you'll get a sanction, like a reduced grade. Sometimes you can actually be suspended. It depends on the severity of the academic integrity violation. And this is because of the point of you being here, right? The point of you being here isn't really for you just to get this paper that says you graduated. It's for you to have the skills that paper is supposed to represent. And so if you are not following the academic integrity policy, you have the paper, but not the skills, and that can bite you when it comes to actually progressing in your career. So, one way that we often hear people talk about academic integrity is that there's an act of theft. You are stealing someone's ideas. But I really do think that more importantly, you are not practicing building on other people's ideas, because that is what you are going to school to learn how to do. There are existing conversations in your field. You're learning what the basics are there so that you can build on them and move forward with what you have created to really contribute to your field, to your organization, to your communities. But within the classroom, frankly speaking, it does confer an unfair advantage over others. And just like you don't want someone to walk in, do no work, and get an A while you're really working hard on that 10-page paper, that's the reason for our academic integrity policies. So here are some tips. Read, please, the academic integrity policy. Go ahead and follow the rules, because unfortunately, not knowing about the rule will not be taken as an excuse. Make sure that you avoid copying work from websites like Coursera or Chegg. Don't upload your work there either. The school is aware of the resources that are there. The school is periodically working to take them down. And that means that you are likely to get caught if you use these sources. So I know that they do not portray themselves as being potentially problematic with academic integrity, but when people are uploading their work there, that is indeed what's happening. Don't ask people to research for you or write your assignments for you. Regardless of if you pay for this, it is indeed considered cheating. This is also where quoting and paraphrasing with those citations is important. If you are nervous about citation styles, what I want to stress here is that as long as you have the information about where this is from, so if it's a summary, that tends to be the author and the book. If it's a quotation or a paraphrase, that's often the author, book, or resource and page. As long as you have that information in, even if you make a mistake about the format, you will be fine. You might get dinged a little bit for the format, but that is not an academic integrity issue. Also, don't use tools that on the internet that tell you they are going to paraphrase or cite or reference without really checking them yourself. I like using those tools when I'm feeling overwhelmed and I just don't want to have to try to format things in APA style from scratch, but I then have to look at everything very carefully when I'm done. Beyond that, do make an appointment with our writing center because you can thoroughly practice, doing all of these skills. And that is key. You can make an appointment with the Writing Fellows or with tutor.com, both of which are available to you. And I always suggest doing so before you think you need them, because that's how you grow in ways you didn't know you needed to. So why wait until you have comments from a professor or a grade you didn't like to step up in that way? Of course, cite your sources. And this is one that trips up a lot of students. Do not resubmit work for more than one class without getting the permission of both of your professors. This sometimes gets called self-plagiarism. The idea is that the assumption is for each of your courses, you are creating brand new work. If you want to do, say, one paper for two courses, or you want to integrate part of a paper you wrote from one course into another, you need to have the permission of both instructors before you do that. Of course, make sure to follow any posted rules in your course about prepared notes, digital devices, and collaboration, particularly with exams. And take all of this seriously because I know that it can be particularly tempted to take some shortcuts when you are overwhelmed, but it's just not worth that risk. That 0 on an assignment can really hurt your grade. So please be mindful there. Let me pause. I see some questions. So I'm actually going to answer. Well, I want to ask for clarification. One question says, what is a classic format for SPS? So if you can just give me information about what you mean there, that would be very helpful. And I see someone has asked about responsible AI use and how that plays into writing a paper. And guess what? That's next. So I'm so glad you asked that question. Essentially, in all cases of AI use, treat this like you would other tools. So just like I said, right now, you need to get the permission from your professors to reuse work you've already written. You also want to get the permission from your professor to use AI in anything that is being submitted for a grade. So that is key. Treat AI like it is a person in terms of the academic integrity policy. But beyond that, and Catalina, I see you raised your hand, but please do put your question for me in the QA, because we've got more than 100 people and I do not want to risk a little bit too much conversation within our time. So Here are some tips about using AI. First of all, you want to set expectations. So remember that AI can't replace you, your thoughts, your ideas, your creativity. It can just be a tool that helps you. Define your goals. So, for example, I might be someone who wants some help brainstorming ideas. I think I have an idea about why cats are better than dogs, but I'm not quite sure that I am choosing the right evidence. I'm not quite sure that this is particularly convincing. I can essentially use AI to have a conversation about that. And that can help me identify weaknesses in my argument. When you're doing this, you of course want to make sure that the prompts or the questions you ask AI are clear, because there's an old saying, garbage in leads to garbage out. What you put into the tool impacts the quality of what you get out. But I always like to remind students of Wikipedia. So I don't know if you were in school when Wikipedia launched. I was teaching when it first became a big deal. And AI is to writing like Wikipedia is to research. It's a tool and a starting point, not the whole process. So just like you would not go to Wikipedia, or you should not go to Wikipedia and use this as a legitimate source, right? This is not a source you should cite in your research. It should instead be a source you use to figure out where to go for your research. What is the general picture? What are the big picture issues that I don't know about yet? What are the citations at the bottom of the Wikipedia page, right? So I'm using Wikipedia to help me, but I'm not using it as the be all end all of my research process. AI is the same thing. Where students really get into trouble is they use AI as their writing process. They say, you know what, here's the prompt for my paper. ChatGPT, please write me a paper answering this question. My thesis is this. That is where you get into trouble. So you can see all of the examples I gave earlier are not AI writing your paper for you. It's helping you to write your paper. And that is an important distinction. So just to sum it up, if having another person do a task for you when you were working on an assignment would be a problem, using AI to do it will also be a problem. So think of AI like a really sort of strange person in this case. Learn the skills anyway. Free AI tools in particular can sometimes be unreliable. They make things up. That's going to increase, and it's also potentially going to increase with some of the paid tools, because we're at a point where a lot of these AI companies are using sites like Reddit to train their language model, right? And if you know anything about social media, you know that you can't always trust what people say on there. And that means you are not always going to be able to trust what AI says either. So learn the skills anyway, look at the information anyway. Don't just take AI for granted. So fact check, make sure you research and validate, and potentially explore different platforms to help find ones that best suit your need. So for me, when I'm writing an article, for example, some of my favorite types of tools to use are ones where I can say, okay, I have a whole bunch of my notes from my research here. Tool, will you please find all of the notes that I've written that are related to this topic? And that saves me a whole bunch of time when it comes to finding where a topic is listed in my notes, figuring all of that out. I now have this, I have the connections, and I can use that to really help me brainstorm parts of my argument. That use of AI is actually going to serve you much better than just having it write a paper for you, because those are the types of uses of AI that are really going to help you in your careers. So that is an overview. We hit a couple of things that I know I need to go into more depth for. And so let me start with one about How do you not have a paragraph that's full of evidence? How do you explain your evidence? Let's start there. So I'm briefly going to stop sharing. I am going to go into another document because I'll actually show you an example. And what I'm going to show you an example of is a paragraph that I wrote as an early graduate student. So let me share this, and then I will share screen again. All right, so if I'm trying to build a paragraph and I don't want it to just be full of evidence, I want it to be pretty well-rounded. First step is to start with that topic sentence, right? And remember, your topic sentence is the thesis of your paragraph. So in this case, the thesis statement of this paragraph is the conclusion depicts many types of the love stories unhappy endings. I was a literature student. I'm talking about a book, right? So you don't know what the book is, but you know what my main point's going to be. Step two then is to add some evidence. So in this case, I'm not actually quoting anyone because of where I was in this paper, but I'm still giving 3 pieces of evidence. The first one is that there is a loss through a character's death. The second one is that this character experiences a great fall. He was a respected member of society, and now he lives alone and nobody loves him, essentially. And third, there's a metaphorical death, right? So I've got 3 pieces of evidence. And then at the end, I am adding a concluding sentence. So my concluding sentence in this case is, all of this is the result of the narrator's failure to voluntarily accept who another character is. Now, I'm going to skip past flow because we've discussed it, but I want to show you this final version of this paragraph. So this is the document that we're going to give you all of. You can see that for flow, I added some transitions, right? So I've got in contrast, which tells you how this paragraph connects to the one that came before it. And then I'm also adding transitions into key parts of the paragraph. So there's also exile, kind of connects my first 2 pieces of evidence, saying it's 1 and 2. And lastly, tells you that this is the last piece of evidence I'm about to give you in this paragraph. So here's my finished paragraph, and I'm just going to read it to you. In contrast, the conclusion depicts many types of the love story's unhappy endings. There's loss through the son's death and the end of the character's marriage. There's also exile, a great fall from being an respected member of society to living alone in an unspecified location without any social connections. Lastly, there is death, if a metaphorical one. All of this is the result of the narrator's failure to voluntarily accept who Anna really is. When I'm looking at this paragraph, what I'm looking for is, do I prove the first sentence? That's question number 1. Remember, that's my topic sentence. It is my thesis for this paragraph. So do I have enough evidence that if I have a skeptical reader who has gotten to this part of my paper, they will read this and they'll be like, all right, I buy that. Second thing I look at is my conclusion in this paragraph supported? So my last sentence, all of this is the result of the narrator's failure to voluntarily accept who Anna really is. Do I feel like I have enough there or in the next paragraph to really highlight that? And if I were using quotations or paraphrases, what that adds here is if I have a quotation, let's say that a great fall from being a respected member of society was a quotation. What I don't want to do is just drop that quotation in there by itself and say, my job is done. I didn't have to write about it. I didn't have to say anything. You should always provide context for your quotation. Why is this quotation important? And what I tell students is the way to determine if you should use a quotation or if you should paraphrase. Paraphrasing is when you take something and you put it in your own words, or if you don't need to do either. So you don't need to do either if it's common knowledge. You want to quote if the way it is said, the words being used are either important. So I'm quoting a famous speech and I want to really talk about the language being used, or I know I can't do it any better. There's just no way. And when you're thinking about that last one, think about it like you are your best friend. Would your best friend say that you could write this sentence well enough? If so, paraphrase it. So that is how I think about it. I really do say, what did I need to prove in my topic sentence? Did I do so? If not, what evidence is missing? Because remember, since you're not thinking about counting sentences, you're thinking about a full idea. You're not stuck saying, oh, I have 7 sentences, I must stop. So I hope that that helps with that question. Let me look and see what else we have. So there are a couple questions about citing evidence. So let me see what I can pull up fairly quickly. The format really does vary based on the type you are using. The type of field you are in, I should say. So like if you are using APA, that's going to look quite different than it will be if you are using MLA style. And that means it's actually difficult for me to show you an example right now. So instead, what I am putting on the screen are a couple of resources. And remember from earlier that you want to trust but verify. OWL in this case stands for Online Writing Lab. So there are 2. There's the Excelsior Writing Lab and there's the Purdue Writing Lab. These 2 are the most famous online writing labs out there. And the only difference is really which one you prefer. They have the same information, just find the one that jives well with the way you think. In terms of Zotero, I am a giant fan of Zotero, and I'm going to show you why. Zotero is essentially a free tool that you can use. Here we go. Resume share. You can use this to help organize your resources. So let's say you're starting now and you've got 2 years before you hit your capstone course. You're not going to remember what you thought about the courses or the resources you read now in your capstone course. But if you use this tool, which again is free, which to me is wild, you can actually go ahead and tag things. So for example, if I am a communication and media student and I am thinking one day I might write my capstone on, I don't know, portrayals of race in 1950s media. Well, every time I read something in any of my courses that connects to any aspect of that, I can add a tag. And then when I'm working on my capstone, all I have to do is go and say, I want to see everything with this tag. And I've got all those resources well organized, right? Where this connects to citations is that there's a word plugin that will help you with citations. But again, remember, it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't have the correct information in Zotero about the author, the journal issue number, things like that, you're going to get errors in your citations. So you do not want to just plug them in and ignore it. You still want to proofread for them. So I'm a big fan of this tool. And I think that it might be helpful. So that's about citing evidence. And one question, what's the best, a long story or a short story? Well, it depends on the story you have to tell. Same thing with your papers. So this is actually a really interesting question. So when you are looking at your assignment prompts, and you're getting a page count and it's telling you, okay, this is longer or shorter, right? It's not necessarily that a longer paper is better than a shorter paper. It's that what you can do in it is different. So for example, when you're writing your capstone, you at that point have so much knowledge from your studies, and you are starting to create new knowledge in the same way that you would if you were to go to graduate school. And in that case, you necessarily have to tell a longer story. So it's not that a longer story is better than a shorter story. It's just which one suits the purpose, your audience, your setting. I am seeing posts about APA questions about how to cite. So we are going to have APA training during the semester, and we'll make sure that you are aware of that. I also see a question about APA resources. You can actually see MLA, and I don't know about CMOS, Chicago, also available with particularly the Purdue OWL, but I think also Excelsior. So while I have that listed as APA resources, those you can choose which format you want more information about. And likewise, Zotero, you can tell it what citation style you want to use. So you can actually use those sources for multiple types of citation styles. You are quite welcome. All right. I feel like we have 1 minute left. So I want to show you one last thing in my 1 minute. Because I find it particularly useful. And I will try to be as brief as possible. This is also in that second document we're going to give you, because just in case you need one more way to think about your paper, this is the way that I love. It's the introduction, body, and conclusion, right? Introductions start out broad like the leaves of a tree. So this is where you have your thesis. This is where you have your hook. So that's the thing that gets people to really want to read what you have to say. Oops, I just skipped forward a whole bunch of slides. So it's also, skipped backward a whole bunch of slides, excuse me. It's also where you provide that background information. So, welcome to the second slide that you're going to see. But essentially, what you want to do is you want to be able to say, I'm starting out broad. In the body of your essay, you're supporting your introduction with narrower statements. That's where your evidence is. And then the conclusion is when you get back out to being big. And so what I really wanted to emphasize here before we end is sometimes students wonder, what do I do in a conclusion? Do I just restate my thesis? I mean, you could, but ideally you're doing more than that. What do you want your reader to do? Why should they care? What is the point of this argument you just made? That's really what makes a super rich conclusion. So if you have any questions whatsoever, I want to make sure you know to reach out to me at the email address I'm about to put on the screen. If I receive or see a bunch of questions in the QA forum, or I get a bunch of them in orientation about writing, I would be more than happy to do an additional We'll call it an office hour because it won't be a webinar. But I'm more than happy to talk about this more. And we will, of course, have more events and trainings during the semester. So please do not think that this is the be-all, end-all of help on writing. Thank you all so much for joining us. I know this was a lot, but we'll make sure you have both of those slide decks. And I hope that this helps you feel a little bit more comfortable as you start writing in the semester. So please take care, everybody, of yourself. And, I'll see you in orientation.